Hello and welcome. Today's episode of the Proactive Caregiver Podcast is a replay of our episode titled Hospice, More Than End of Life. So many caregivers often dismiss hospice as a resource because of the stigma that surrounds it as being only an end-of-life service. This episode will help you to understand that hospice is so much more. We are taking some time off this holiday season and hope you are getting some much-needed respite time as well. Thank you for listening, and now enjoy learning more about hospice.
Hello, and welcome to the Proactive Caregiving Podcast. As a CPA with over 20 years as an industry accountant, Jessica stepped away from the corporate world to become a full-time caregiver for her mother. Having learned invaluable lessons along the way, she is now here to share those with you and to invite you to join her on this caregiver's journey. Here is your host, Jessica Cannon.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back. I'm here today, and I really want you to be able to listen in about a topic that people don't really quite understand, and that's hospice. This is something that I came across through various different type of groups, and it was very eye-opening to know what it is and what it's not. So let me introduce you to Yolanda Campos-Smith. She is a nurse of 31 years, but her last 6 years has been in hospice. She's also a community educator of hospice services. She loves working in this area, and I love learning from her. So without further ado, thanks for coming on, Yolanda.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm so excited that you're having this topic today. Everybody is so afraid of that word hospice. I just love that you're out there educating people.
Right. So caregivers often dismiss hospice. It's a resource that has a little bit of a stigma to it. And, you know, when you say hospice, and like I did myself, the first thing that came to mind was end of life. But
exactly,
it's not only end of life. So what type of, when you look at it from your perspective, what would you tell me what hospice is as far as not end of life?
I always say hospice is about living, and hospice is about support and care for not just the patient, but the family. And I'd even go so far to say it's more for the family, because oftentimes the patient's okay. You know, they need some help, but it's really a lot of support. So you get a nurse that comes out to visit you, and that's a group of nurses that are on call 24/7. So if you have a question at 2:00 in the morning, you're not sure if this is normal or should we do something, we're there to answer those questions for you. And if need be, to go out and check, make sure everything's okay. You also get a nursing assistant that comes out up to 5 days a week to help with grooming and bathing. And sometimes just a little companionship for the patient. And during that time, the caregiver can take a breather, for a little while. And you get the benefits of having equipment. If you need a hospital bed, you need a wheelchair, shower chair, incontinence supplies. That's a big one. I don't know if you've ever had to price briefs. They're expensive. They give you briefs and wipes and of course any medications related to the diagnosis that brought you on to hospice.
So when people actually begin with hospice, why does it seem like they improve once they begin the services?
That's a great question. Studies show people live longer on hospice than without. And sometimes, that can be for a variety of reasons. Sometimes that patient was a little isolated. Maybe they weren't able to get out and or isolated in the house. Sometimes they get a little lonely or even depressed about what's happening in their life. And they get all these extra, I like to call them friends, that come by and visit a few times a week. And we also have a social worker and a chaplain that check in on them. So that's a lot of extra set of eyes.
Mm-hmm.
We try to catch things early, maybe a urinary tract infection or maybe a respiratory. We try to catch things early because we do come by often. And so, yeah, their health is better maintained, and we're also keeping an eye on their medications.
True.
Because sometimes maybe they forget to take their medicines, or we even had some patients not taking them. They tuck them under their mattress kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So just a bunch of extra eyes to kind of catch things and kind of manage things a little bit better in the home setting.
Right. And it's definitely helpful. I know my mom used to tell me stories about her father when he was needing extra help at home, that he used to hide his medication, or he would pretend he was taking it and hold it under his tongue. And
Mhm.
at the time when
Spit it
she
out.
told me
Yeah.
about those stories, I thought, well, that's kind of odd and that's funny, or that's interesting, or that's scary, or just however the context was at the time. And then later, fast forward, I'm taking care of my mom, and I started keeping an eye on her as she was taking her medicine, and started asking which pill was for what ailment. And that's when I thought, oh, I need to keep an eye on her, make
Mm.
sure she's not trying to hide her medications and not take certain ones, or yeah.
Well, another good thing about the medications is, people think once you're on hospice, we stop everything. And that
Right.
could not be further from the truth. Of course, we're not going to want to stop blood pressure medicines or things for diabetes or things that are going to make you worse. Well, of course, but there's certain things that are more preventative, maybe like, let's say, some of the Alzheimer medicines or maybe cholesterol medicines that are just extra pills and not going to benefit us at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We'll stop those. Because, can you imagine having to take 7-8 pills a day every morning? And, some people don't want to. Now, if they still want to and it's not going to harm them, we'll let them continue. I always like to say the patient, the family, or the captain of the ship, we follow your lead. We give you the information. These are your options.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so a lot of times people often get rid of some of those preventative kind of medications that aren't going to make a difference at this point. And because, patients don't like to take extra pills.
No, I know the more medication that my mother was prescribed, the more of a argument there seemed to be when it came time to taking her medicines. And I get it. I mean,
Exactly.
in her mind at the time, the idea of the side effects, or I don't need this, but you can't really argue with someone who doesn't want to take their medicines, and having someone else to step in, especially that nurse that steps in to help, and they see that person as a helper, not a family member that's telling them what to do. It is a great help.
It is, because they react different to us than they do their families.
Absolutely.
I hate to think of older people as children, but you know how when children are young, they always behave better with other people than they do their own parents.
Exactly.
It's kind of the same thing with adults. Yeah.
It is. It's almost a different level of respect when it comes to that person coming in for care.
Right. You'll see them do things for therapists or other things, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I've never seen you do that before.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Almost showing off,
Right. So they have their end of life. So that's someone who is literally, I don't know if you give it a number, even 24 hour, 48 hour, 72 hour. But then there are those that are in this preventative stage where it's not quite the entire end of life. They just need extra hands-on. They need extra or additional help in the home or wherever they are, if it's in a facility. So hospice can actually step in and not be that entire end of life.
Exactly. So, that end of life thing, it just all, when we say that, people just think of death.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it's, if you think about it, we all are in the process of dying, right?
Right.
I could walk out the door today and be hit by a truck, and that's the end of me. So we don't have that crystal ball. We aren't able to say, but we do see signs that help us tell that somebody's going to qualify for hospice. So generally, the rule is that if a doctor was to say that without any intervention, and meaning without any medical treatment of whatever your condition is, he would not be surprised if you would pass within 6 months to a year. Now, sometimes we will see signs like loss of weight, loss of appetite, loss of muscle mass. Have you ever seen somebody that maybe they're not so thin, but they just look frail?
Right.
They look like weak, and they're having a hard time getting up and moving around. Loss of function. Maybe before they've never had accidents, and now they're having very frequent accidents. Urinating in their pants, or having an accidental bowel movement, or even accidents like tripping and falling a lot, having frequent same infections like UTIs or upper respiratory infections or pneumonias even. Because some people, especially Parkinson's, some dementia patients, have problems swallowing. Their muscles get real weak, and so they swallow a little bit of the food into their lungs, and they end up with pneumonia frequently. And that's another sign that we'll start to see. So we have enough of these signs that we can document, then we know that, they have a life-limiting illness. And so if without any intervention, pneumonia can kill somebody, especially an older person. So we really need to manage that closely.
You mentioned that without any intervention, even UTIs, those are silent killers.
Exactly. People become very confused with the UTI. They get what they call urosepsis, and that's when they get the infection in the urine and even into their bloodstream. People can truly die from sepsis. It makes them very confused and very sick very fast. So that's another thing we want to keep a close eye on.
So if you're not taking your loved one to a doctor, and not that you're not taking them all, but if you're not going on a regular basis, or if you're not able to see those cues and someone's needing additional help, how soon should someone look into hospice services?
Well, all they have to do is call in a local agency. There's several agencies here in town, and somebody can come out to talk to you. So sometimes, they can always ask the doctor. The doctor can make a referral, but even just calling an agency and they'll send somebody out to talk to you and explain it all, see if you meet Medicare sets these guidelines for us. And if you meet the qualifications, we can just go talk to your doctor, get the order, and get all that set for you. However, sometimes we see a patient and they're pretty close, but they're not quite there yet. There's another program that we have called support services, where somebody checks in with you frequently just to make sure there's not any changes, because you would be surprised. Sometimes I see a patient and they're not quite ready for hospice yet, but they're pretty close. And then a couple of days later, the family calls, there's been a big change. And sure enough, sometimes it's just dramatic from one day to the next.
Yeah, I've seen it with my mother. So then there are the caregivers that, and I fall into this category, I'm guilty of it myself. Before I even considered looking into the hospice services, one of the things that kept me from going forward was, one, I kept telling myself that I can do this. I'm capable of doing a lot of things that I honestly really wasn't capable of. And the other thing was, because I kept telling myself that I was capable of handling this care on my own, that I was saving her money. So how are the hospice services paid for?
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. Medicare, Medicaid pays us 100%. Most insurances pay for hospice too. It has a hospice benefit, and we can, some retirees have like a commercial insurance plan. Most of those have great coverage as well, but we could go over with you on that. But Medicare, Medicaid is 100%. And that includes those pricey briefs and the wipes and any supplies you might need for extra safety in the home, like the shower chair, the wheelchair. And, that generation, our generation of, our 80-year-olds and even 90-year-olds are still doing very well sometimes. But that generation was big savers. So they just want to say no right away because they think it's going to cost them a lot of money.
Exactly.
And it's really a lot of help that you've already paid with your Medicare dollars through your, payroll taxes. And it's a shame that more people don't take that benefit and use it. As a matter of fact, most of our patients, once they come on service, are like, gosh, I wish I'd done this a year ago, and it's such an added benefit to have the help come to you and help you. And we do a lot of teaching with the family, and we also do a lot of counseling. Sometimes that caregiver is just overwhelmed and they just need somebody to tell them this is expected. This is the progression of your disease process. This is very normal, Sometimes they need a break, so did you know that hospice offers respite?
Interesting. How does the respite program work?
Okay, so respite is to give the caregiver a break. And then you can also, sometimes I tell people, you can use it for an emergency plan, or you can use it, say the caregiver's family has a graduation or a wedding that they know is 3 months down the road, but there's no way they can go unless somebody cares for a grandma or a patient that's on hospice. And so we will put a patient in a facility of your choice. We'll get something convenient, or you tell us where, and we'll go make a contract with them. And hospice pays for 5 midnights in that facility.
That's incredible.
Yes. So they're getting the care they need, and we still go over there. Even though they're in a facility, we go, our caregivers go and bathe. Our nurse goes and checks on them. And then after the 5 days, they come home, or we've had some families that needed maybe 7 or 10 days, and they make arrangements with the facility for the last couple of days. So it's a nice option, a nice benefit. The caregiver gets time to recharge her batteries, and just feel like, because it's overwhelming. I know you're taking care of your mother, and you do it out of love, but it's still very overwhelming.
Definitely. I know that love is what drove me in the beginning, but I did eventually reach that point. Then I started to see that some of this stuff was not just beyond my knowledge medically, but physically it was starting to become more and more overwhelming. And knowing that there is something that I could reach out, a service that I can reach out and find for this respite care, and know that my loved one's going to receive continuous care, so that I can not only step away and just take a day, because I've had the opportunities every now and again where I would get an outside caregiver, find another company that would come in and would give me those couple of hours a day. But there were so many times that those few hours just were not enough.
Wasn't enough.
Yes, it left me wanting more and more and more. But having something being able to plan and have something to look forward to, like a mini vacation or something, 5 days is definitely a time to step away and recharge those batteries physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and then come back into that caregiving role. That's a blessing.
It really is, because, and there's been studies that show that caregivers sometimes don't outlive the patient because it's so stressful. It's a syndrome called caregiver burnout. And if you don't take those breaks, and most caregivers, some have children and a husband or, spouse at home, and on top of that, so they're kind of sandwiched between the mom or the grandma or whoever they're caring for and their own family. That's a lot on one person.
It is.
Yes.
It is. And when I realized that when I was getting to the point that I was no longer looking forward to certain things with my son, I was wanting him to, looking forward to the times where he could handle things all on his own and be more of his independent self, instead of me feeling like I had one more person to care for. It does get to be a little bit too much and a little overwhelming after time period. And then worrying about me caring about myself at some point and not feeling guilty about wanting to care about myself.
That's the key word right there. A lot of caregivers feel obligation and guilt that I have to do this. But I've been a nurse 31 years, and I'm telling you, I couldn't do it by myself. You burn out, and you hear these horror stories of people that have injured their loved ones out of anger or frustration. And it really does get to that point. And so it's important that somebody step away and, recharge on a regular basis. And then, I just did this the other day with one of our patients, went by and saw the spouse. Sometimes the grieving process, especially with dementia patients, I say even more with dementia patients, because their personality changes and they start grieving and say, this is not the man I knew 6 months ago. And I said, I totally understand. And it's hard because you feel like you've lost your life partner. And she said, exactly. That's exactly what I feel like. I said, don't feel guilty for feeling that way, because you have. The man that you love and you knew 6 months ago is not with us right now. I said,
Right.
and unfortunately, I said, and don't feel guilty about feeling that way. And she, so we oftentimes are there supportive for the family because we see all kinds of stuff, as far as the symptoms on our patients oftentimes are across the board. There's some that are mild and some but we see the same scenarios over and over again. It's very common with there's a whole slew of different kinds of dementia disorders, but it's so funny that the symptoms are often very much the same,
right?
Men versus women, and it's heartbreaking. Such a cruel disease. It really is.
It is, and it's helpful and priceless having that additional person there that can understand what you're going through. They know, emotional support, and they know what you're going through. They know where you're headed. And for me, a lot of the times the education that's provided along the way is so beneficial because it helps to cover that unknown area. And that unknown is what creates a lot of the stress. It's not just the medical part of it. It's not just the physical part of it, but that unknown of not understanding
what to expect.
Yeah, what to expect next. I mean, you get a book of what to expect when you're expecting as a mother waiting for her child, but there is very little information of what to expect, or the caregiver not knowing where to find it, reaching out to get to that information.
Right. But you're right. You see that book. I know exactly what book you're talking about what to expect when you're expecting your first year of child, the baby for the first year. It's practically a step-by-step guide. Somebody really needs to write one for dementia because it's like, did you know that most dementia people crave sugar? You know that?
Yes.
And so she was talking about he started eating peanut butter and he never liked peanut butter in his life. And I said, so we explained that about, the sugar. I said, some people eat so much so they throw up. I said, you have to watch the amount because they just want more and more and more. Some people take a nap and wake up and they think it's the next day and insist on breakfast.
Right.
And so she started laughing then. But so we went over several things and scenarios in the next several stages in his journey. And she had actually taken care of her mom with Alzheimer's. And she said, her mother was nothing like this. I said, everybody is just a little bit different. Not everybody has all the same symptoms. But, I know we're talking a lot about dementia, but CHF, COPD people have their own things. They get that anxiety because they feel like they can't get enough air in. And so there's a lot of symptoms that we're used to seeing, and we can tell the patient, okay, this is normal and expect that. And we try to do that all along because just like you said, it's the unknown that is so scary. And if okay, my nurse said this is normal, this is what expected, this is what I'm going to do. Or we always tell you, if you don't remember what we told you, call us and we'll walk you through it. So.
Definitely. And that's why I also like that hospice works closely with your physicians. So that unknown, not knowing which doctor needs to, some things are a little obvious, but some things are not. And even when you do have the right physician, you make the appointment, sometimes the explanations, not always easy to grasp. Or when you get that explanation, knowing the range of what's normal and what's not. Again, that's where a lot of that stress comes in.
Well, right. And then, trying to get a hold of a doctor at 2 a.m, not likely, right?
Right.
So, and we also give the families what we call a comfort kit. Because maybe when we first start seeing them, they don't really have a lot of symptoms. But when do those things always happen? It's 2 a.m, right?
Right.
So we give them a little emergency kit, we call the comfort kit, and it has something for pain, something for nausea, something for anxiety, something for constipation. So if something calls us, they call us and say, okay, get your little kit out, and you're going to do this, and we walk them right through it so that anything that could possibly go wrong, that we have something to deal with it right there in their home.
That's excellent. And to me, that's a perfect example of whether it's the considered your end of life or it's preventative in, so to speak, the last 6 months of the year of someone's life, that you've got to be prepared every moment of the day, it seems, but not feeling the full stress of the responsibility for everything, having that hospice
Right.
person. So even if it was that 2 a.m. type of thing and you get that support right away, there's still the next day, there's a follow-up.
Oh, no, sometimes right that minute. Like I've had patients that have called and said, I don't think they're breathing right. Now, we put an oxygen concentrator and tank, even though the patient doesn't need it, because again, those things happen in the middle of the night.
Of course.
And so we'll say, okay, and we teach people how to turn it on when we're there. But, if you hadn't done it before, you may forget. So I'll say, okay, push this button, push this to number 2, put it over their ears, and I'm on my way. And that way we can just go make sure everything's okay. And sometimes they'll say, oh, no, they're breathing better. You can come in the morning or, but sometimes, especially if it has to do with breathing, I personally like to go out and just lay eyes on, make sure everything's okay. But yeah, we try to have the supplies, their little toolkits, if you will, ready. And that way we can handle. Like I said, a lot of the symptoms are very common across the board. And that way we're prepared and the family feels empowered, actually.
Right.
Saying, okay, we got this. We're good.
And that's a big difference, feeling empowered versus feeling out of control or helpless. That is a huge difference. So then you get a chance to work with the families on so much more of a level than you do with the care recipient, being that you're counseling them, you're educating them, and they have even a care plan that's built for the family.
Exactly. We do, because like every person is different. Every person's situation is different. Their symptoms are different. But as they progress or even decline, we know that some of the same situations are going to happen. So we had a patient recently that the patient himself was not able to get up and transfer anymore like he was, and he was getting weaker and weaker. So the spouse called and said, is there any way we can get some therapy? And we said, sure, we can send a therapist out. I said, but it's not going to be the therapy that you're thinking of, that he's going to get stronger. We're going to have him walking again. We're going to be doing all that. This therapy, we're going to show him exercise we can do to kind of maintain his strength. But it's more to show you and the patient how to safely transfer from maybe a wheelchair to the bed, or from the bed to or from the wheelchair to the couch, or whatever his needs are at the house. And so we had the therapist go out for 6 visits. And so I said, they gave us a bunch of exercises he can do right in the chair. And they were very happy with that. So even though it's not the kind of like rehab that she was thinking of, it was still a solution. It still buys him some time, keeps that strength going. And we're doing educating both the wife and the patient how to transfer safely.
That's excellent. It's such a relief having this service. And it's such a shame that so many people would dismiss it just because they think end of life, oh, my loved one's not about to die, or he's not that far gone, or she's not that bad. I've heard those comments, and I've
had doctors tell me that, and then I come back and follow up, and I say, how's Mrs. So-and-so? He said, oh, she passed 2 weeks ago. And I want to say, what a shame, because she was definitely a candidate 6 months ago, and look at all the help we could have given the family. And that's why I said, if you're struggling to get to the doctor, it's hard to get that patient in the car and get them in. I mean, that tells you, okay, we need to bring the care to you. I wish I could change hospice's name. I say that all the time.
Right.
So I could just put support care or more care or something. There's all this basically free help and all this care from people that are specialized in, end of care, end of life care. And it is a specialty. There's meds that we use that they don't use in other areas of medicine. The doctors have specialty and board certification, hospice and palliative care. So it truly is a specialty. It's not for everybody, Not everybody can handle, the sadness of seeing people go. But I really see it as a blessing in most times. Because that patient is no longer suffering, or they're ready. Sometimes you just see it in their eyes. They're ready, They've lived their life and they're ready to join whoever on the other side.
Right. Right. And that's another part of this, even more so that even though you have worked with this family and their loved one, going through this process with them, when they meet the end of life and they pass on and their journey somewhat ends here with us, hospice services are able to continue on with the family afterwards and checking in.
That's exactly right. We have a bereavement program that follows the family because, sometimes, just like you were talking about that caregiver earlier, they're so busy doing this, busy doing that. When it's all the busyness stops, they're lost.
Yes.
They're like, oh my gosh, what now?
Exactly.
And their whole purpose, maybe from the last several years, is all changed right now. So, yeah. And we've also developed friendships with these families and patients. And it's, we go to funerals and I have had former families still keep in contact with me, and I love that, because you were privileged enough to be there at a very special time. Right now, when they're going through it, doesn't feel so special. But when they look back and think about it, it was a very special time.
Exactly. It was a pleasant experience knowing that you were there helping them along and supporting them emotionally throughout their scary journey. And it's amazing, like you said it that way, and I've experienced it a little bit so far, is that my days, my routines, my calendar appointments, everything was evolving around my mother's needs and her schedule. And when it came to a point of transitioning her from our in-house into a proper facility that she was getting better care, the care that she was needing, it was a little bit of a shock to me afterwards, not knowing what to do with my days, and they weren't as filled with appointments or care issues that I was having with her. The routines just totally changed, and it took me a while to adapt to it and realize that I could start making different plans and working on different projects. I kept feeling like I was going to have to drop everything any moment to rush to her side, and it wasn't the case. It was a weird and strange transition for me.
Absolutely. Well, can you imagine, and that was just her going to a facility.
Right.
Can you imagine losing your loved one and then you're going, what now? So I'm glad that we have those relationships already in place. And that's what's good about it when somebody comes in with time to develop. And what's sad is when we get the referral and they maybe have 2 weeks with us. It's hard to make those bonds in 2 weeks.
Right. But the fact that you're there and the services are there, and it's so important to consider these services and knowing that they are covered through Medicare, Medicaid is even more so reason to look for it and not avoid it. Because I know I avoided thinking that not only was I trying to do things by myself, but I was trying to save her money, and that's not the case. And knowing the services that were there, that I could have learned more, because I know I was in situations myself when I'd have doctors ask me, have you been checking your blood sugar? Yes, I've learned how to do that. It's a little difficult. She hates it, but we manage. And then when they ask, have you checked your blood pressure? Okay, now that's a different issue. Some of these things I felt uncomfortable doing myself and didn't feel like I would be adequate enough or would pick up certain things that nurse would. So knowing that these services are available and how much peace of mind comes out of this, I mean, that in itself is priceless.
Oh, yeah. I always say knowledge is power,
Absolutely.
And we've had families that we teach how to use the electric blood pressure monitor stuff, you just push a button and then you get the numbers. And so some people like to keep logs, and some people like, that's not necessary unless they're having a lot of things. It just depends on the person,
Right.
Every case is different. Some people like doing it. Some patients like doing it. So I said, whatever makes you happy. You're the boss here, so you let us know. So, and that's the beauty of hospice too is, up until hospice, you don't have a lot of control over your plan of care. It seems like doctors make those choices for you, or, say this is what's best. And when you come on hospice, you are the boss. You tell us, now we're not going to let you do anything that's going to be harmful or whatever.
Right.
But if you say, I don't want to do this, but I do want to do that, as long as it's not going to harm you, we're okay with that. It's your right to say, I don't want to do any more cancer treatment, or I don't want to do anything more for my congestive heart failure. The doctor says there's nothing that's left to do. And that's your right to be happy and live comfortable and supported.
And sometimes those are the hard decisions to make. And knowing when to place those healthy boundaries, it's difficult. But having someone there that is explaining what's normal, what's not, what can be done within it, and what might help calm your nerves, as knowing what to expect next, it makes a world of difference.
It really does. And you know what? And sometimes we have new normals with hospice. Because, maybe our patient lays down all day long. And as people decline and progress, that's one of the signs that we look for. They sleep a lot more. They spend a lot of time in the bed or in a chair. They're not going to have the same blood pressure they had when they were up running around.
Right.
And, so we take all that into factor, and we hand over that information to you. And like you said earlier, it's the unknown that's so scary. Well, if you have all this knowledge, it makes you understand it, and it really helps with coping.
Definitely. I absolutely agree. So I know you're here in Central Texas, and others listening may be able to reach out to their local services for hospice services. But Yolanda, for those here in the Central Texas area, how do they go about finding your hospice services?
Okay, well, they can just give me a call here at Bluebonnet Hospice. Our office is here in Round Rock, but we service a wide service area. So they can just give us a call, and I'll be glad to talk or answer any questions. And I love doing information only, too, because maybe somebody's not ready, but they need the time to digest and think about it and just want to hear what the options are. I love doing those consults, and I love to do it with the whole family. Because sometimes, by the time somebody tells this aunt and this uncle or this brother or daughter,
definitely,
it's not the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want everybody to get their questions answered so we're all on the same page. So, yeah, just a quick phone call to Bluebonnet Hospice, and I could do it over the phone with the COVID thing. We come out with our mask and all that stuff. We can do that, or I've had people say, just meet me outside a facility. I've done that. Whatever makes you comfortable, because it's a hard enough topic. We want to make it as easy and comfortable for you.
Yes, definitely. They have, I highly recommend, Bluebonnet has non-discriminatory services that covers home health care, palliative care, and other therapy services. So as you're considering additional help or even respite care, definitely look into your local services, or as Yolanda said, with Bluebonnet. So I hope this has given you more food for thought. And until next time, be proactive. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please visit www.jessicalazelcannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media, LLC, www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Chris Paradise.